Hello everyone, greetings from the 7th of Nero. AJ here with a continuation of the Faction Overview series. From the title it should be fairly obvious to established players at least which minor faction will be covered here. The major faction as well, but for those newer to the setting, it's Circle Orboros and the Farrow part of the minions. Both are very aesthetically different, Farrow's goofiness being a nice change from the rather serious nature of both the elves and the dwarves of last installment. There's something inherently amusing about a playable porcine race, and some of their tabletop rules, particularly the signature one creatively named Bacon, are pretty tongue-in-cheek to match. As for Circle Orboros, not much to say about them except angry druids, angrier puppies, and the angriest trees. The Circle Orboros came about in the aftermath of the defeat of the Mulgar confederations by Menite priest kings late in the Warlord era. Its various surviving tribes and races went their separate ways, with the trolls returning to Dunia's embrace, while the humans retreated further to the fringes of civilization. But the cultists to the worm clung to their beliefs and organization coalesced around the pragmatic Blackclads. Many misconceptions exist concerning the Blackclads, but they allow these to continue, for it serves their ends to be misunderstood and thus underestimated at every turn. Most importantly, the Blackclads are neither priests nor clerics who worship or promote the worship of the devourer worm, whom they consider one of the manifestations of the greatest of primordial entities, the titular Orboros. Indeed, the name Blackclad is a contrivance of outsiders who noted the black cloaks and weapons using darkened steel favoured by the druids, and the Circle assumed it willingly, for the sense of foreboding that the label brought suited their means and ends. As mentioned, they are pragmatists and fully realize that the worm is not an entity that requires or even desires worship, though they greatly respect and revere it. The worm exists and it is the embodiment of chaos and entropy. That is all the Blackclads need to comprehend about it to carry out their tasks. Mollifying the worm is perhaps the best way of describing what they do, working to ensure that the world continues to exist in as natural a state as possible. And this means combating the encroachment of civilization. The industries of the races of Imoran disrupt the flow of energy through the ley lines, and letting this fester is the surest way of raising the devourer worm's ire. Indeed, the Blackclads rightly fear the worm, and would have it continue its eternal battle with Menoth. So do they destroy the polluting products of urban ingenuity, so as not to attract the worm's attention, and see it destroy all it beholds on Cain. Because of this fight against civilization to keep the worm's attention away from Imoran, the Blackclads gladly look to all manner of cultists and barbarians from far-flung corners of the continent to serve their ends. Such people, whether abandoned by society or because they abandoned society, are anathema to everything that the Blackclads are fighting against, and thus make the most ideal of servants. And while they have no intentional organization amongst themselves, the Blackclads have formalized rights and hierarchies amongst the disparate tribes so that they would have ready bands of warriors to call to arms at a moment's notice, no matter where such force is required. As such, the human cultists and tribes that serve the Circle all muster companies of spear-armed wolves of Orboros and crossbow-armed reeves. Though they may differ from tribe to tribe, they share a common martial culture imbued in them by the Blackclads. On a more unified scale are the Tuaths of Tharn, a bestial race who have ever been worshippers of the devourer, who were once human in days millennia past. The Tharn long saw the druids to be heralds of the devourer worm, and served them out of respect and awe. At first, support from the Tharn was limited due to their low numbers in the aftermath of the defeat of the Mulgar and the curse of the 10 Ills, making them a threat the human nations could easily ignore for the most part. But eventually their loyalty and their willingness to fight was only affirmed when Morvana cured them of the curse, allowing them to not only commit their warriors to more war efforts as they so yearn for, but to do so wholeheartedly and without fear for the future of their race. That the Circle can call upon the Tharn in far greater numbers now is a great boon to the druids. Organization of the Circle Orboros is centered around the 3 dominions that divide Imoran, each with more or less equal populations. The southern dominion encompasses Signar, Ord, and much of Free Lael. The northern dominion covers Cador, occupied Lael and rule, while the remainder of Imoran falls into the eastern dominion. These spheres of influence are largely separate, with little interaction in their maintenance among the omnipotents who form the highest level of command short of Wormwood. That said, Wormwood is not an entity of command or rule per se, more an ally, an avatar of the devourer worm and a projection of Orboros' will, with its spokesperson, the Oathkeeper, in tow, currently a human once known as Cassius, a former druid. Subordinate to the Omnipotents are the Potents, who administer the areas around important nexus points where the ley lines flow strongest. These ley lines are what allow the Circle Orboros to have and maintain their shadowy presence all across Imoran, as the senior Blackclads, Druids and Elder Purebloods who know the rituals required to bend them to such a purpose can utilize them to transport themselves across the continent in the blink of an eye. Under the Potents are the Overseers, who take responsibility for specific areas and the Circle's allies and assets within them, perhaps a tribe or two of Tharn, gatherings of cultists, or a location of spiritual importance to the organization. Answering to the Overseers are Warders, each seeing to small parcels of territories, making sure that blight is neutralized, the worshippers therein are kept whatever passes for happy, and the sacred sites are protected. And serving them are the most junior druids, the Wilders, who have various duties depending on where they are posted and whom they answer to directly. Irrespective of their rank, though, the hierarchy of the organization is dominated by these druids, and while various parts of the Circle Orboros are ruled over by kings, queens, or chieftains, to a man, woman, or Tharn, they heed the words of the druids, even the Wilders. And this extends to the warlocks. The vast majority of them are black-clad druids, who themselves are powerful individuals in possession of what they call the wilding. Occasionally, however, warlocks can be found among the ranks of the more bestial once human Tharn, but no matter their power, their awareness of their relationship within the circle means that they submit themselves before one of the senior leaders, often declaring fealty to one among the potents. As a human phenomenon, explaining its ever so occasional occurrence among the Tharn, the wilding affects humans randomly, but always at an early age, and the Circle is conscious of their need to constantly bolster their numbers as they continue to struggle against growing numbers of enemies who do not appreciate their goals, or worse, threaten their existence. As a result, much is invested in the search for and detection of children who are born with the wilding. The Druids will go to great lengths to have those with the wilding join their ranks, even if it means abducting the child from obdurate parents. Though, in what is perhaps an ironic mercy given their reputation for ruthlessness, they stop short of premeditated murder, instead acknowledging that parenthood and child-rearing is a part of the natural order of the world. More often than not, though, the wilding changes the child far too radically in the eyes of their parents, and many are given to the Blackclads willingly. To the Druids, the wilding is the mark of a soul touched by Orboros, and as such, those who have this gift have a primal connection with the world around them, as well as the beasts that are endemic to the Circle's bestiary. Unlike the Legion of Everblight and the Trollkin, the Circle Orboros draws their bestiary from numerous sources, and unlike the Scorn, they do comparatively little to restrain their aggression, allowing their beasts to satiate themselves on and off the battlefield. Well, some of them. The other beasts do not display aggression in the traditional sense. On that note, the beasts they bring to war come in all shapes and forms. Some fly, some used to be human, while some neither live nor bleed. This gives rise to a bestiary that is awkward to categorize simply due to the variety. Nonetheless, they can be split into two broad groups, flesh and blood, and sticks and stones. The Blackclads of the Circle find value in perhaps the most untamable of beasts, and the predators and prowlers of the wilds offer a wide selection of weapons for them to leverage, whether griffins, or their far larger cousins, the storm raptors, argi, or the mountain satyrs. A little separate from them are the warp-wolves, perhaps the most intelligent beasts of any faction, given that they used to be human, whether in ancestry or in reality, often retaining some semblance of human personality. As to the beasts of wood and rock, known as wolds, stone shapers use old rituals infusing suitably prepared materials with the blood of the living to bring what passes for life to these crudely bound bundles of rocks. While each warlock of the Circle knows how to command any beast, whether flesh or of stone, the aptitude with which they form spirit bonds with them varies greatly, and many black-clad warlocks display a decided preference to one sort or the other. However, no few are equally adept at commanding both. Examples such as Kaya demonstrate the keen affinity for the canine beasts available to warlocks, with Una displaying the same for griffins, while Bradigus Thal has almost unparalleled skill at manipulating wolds. But such specialization matters not when it comes to the factionalism within the Circle, as it is those who ascend the hierarchy, using their positions of power, that may eventually learn many of the Circle's secrets, which affect how they view the future of the organization's operations. Kruger the Stormwrath, who declared himself Stormlord and is quietly viewed as among the most powerful of the Blackclads alive, rivaling the Omnipotents, brought the Circle almost into conflict within itself due to his dealings with Blightagast and the Draconic Alliance in his efforts to forestall Everblight's growth in power. His actions have made him a divisive figure, and politics within the Circle Orboros have threatened to tear it apart, having come to blows with Lortus the Watcher, master of the Southern Dominion. This occurred as a result of the Omnipotent's collective disapproval with the Stormlord's strategy and his continued flagrance of their commands. Though events would vindicate him, tensions would remain as he has powerful allies, as well as powerful rivals, and a former mentor who is neither ally nor rival. Like the other factions beyond the Iron Kingdoms of Amoran, the Circle Orboros are not above looking for allies of convenience in addition to their available forces, however much they dislike it, suspicious and distrustful as they are. Every so often, though, some common ground can be found. The Farrow have a largely undocumented history, and surprisingly little is known about their past, not least because of human attitudes towards their presence, largely disdained by successive states across the era, and the Farrow themselves aren't interested in knowing their own history. This extends to a lack of adherence to any number of creation myths, which they generally shrug off with a disinterest. Some, particularly the Cholkin, believe them to be a Dunian race as well, though they came by civilization much later. And indeed, at the time, they were considered too primitive to join by the Mulgar alliance. A slightly grimmer theory is that the Farrow were the accelerated evolutionary result of meddling by Arcanists during the Orgoth occupation era. Evidence is circumstantial at best, but there is a measure of merit to this theory. Farrow society is a contradiction in terms depending on who you ask, and indeed they are a fractious group, adhering to a vague variant of a might makes right principle, whether in defeating their rivals among the Farrow or other races, or defending their territory they allegedly rule. In recent years, certain parts of Farrow tribal leadership have changed their ways, under the realization that though the kingdoms of mankind view them as nuisances more than anything else, more powers are at work than even the nominally apathetic Farrow care to ignore. Thus, the most ambitious of them, Lord Carver, the bringer of most massive destruction, Esquire, lest anyone forget his self-professed titles and dignities, set about trying to unite the Farrow tribes. Those that have submitted to him, whether by what passes for diplomacy among the Farrow, or in defeat in battle, have formed, under his leadership, the Thornfall alliance. But his available forces do not have the best equipment, plundered from defeated local foes, as most of it tends to be, while the rest is haphazardly improvised. And further, they lack the discipline of even the most ill-behaved of Signaran or Ordic mercenary companies. Thus, other leaders, particularly Helga the Conqueror, have taken another option, by doing what she can to modernize what forces she has and making them into an army that the humans would truly need to reckon with, instead of merely having numbers to back up her words. Broadly speaking, the Farrow forces are divided by the traditions of their villages or individuals' predecessors. In reality, there is little separating various companies or armies within the Thornfall beyond individual warlords or chieftains and the warriors that they would normally lead, even though Carver has a hand-picked force under his direct command, composed of those he considers a cut above the rest. This force is the 1st Assault Brigade Company. For the most part, though, rough bands of brigands form the backbone of both Helga's and Carver's warbands, but gangs of polearm-wielding slaughterhouses, grenade-armed commandos, and flesh magic-using bone grinders complement to varying degrees. As for the beasts, they are a more grotesque and even more unsophisticated equivalent of Circle's warp wolves, biological experiments done on normal Farrow by Dr. Arcadius, who realized the evolutionary adaptability of the Farrow, allowing him to craft beasts from normal warriors, adding muscle and additional organ tissue to their frames and compelling them to adapt to their newfound strength. Quite how the Farrow survived through such seemingly horrific biomechanical upgrades, impromptu surgery, and alchemical ministrations is beyond most. Then again, were it not for the Farrow and their apparent willingness, Dr. Arcadius would have found some other unfortunate species upon which to conduct his studies into the secrets of life. It is well that the Farrow respond to his treatment so productively. And who knows, if a bunch of elves and their arrogant overlord can make an archangel out of a massive corpse, what can Dr. Arcadius do with enough time? A few dozen hogs, some bloody tools, and a bit of ingenuity.